My wife's mother moved into our home without asking and refuses to leave. My mother-in-law arrived for a 2-week visit and never left, turning my home into a nightmare I couldn't escape. My name is Ethan, and I am 32 years old. This is the story of how my life was slowly dismantled, one passive-aggressive comment at a time, by the woman who gave birth to my wife. The day it all started began like any other Tuesday. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and I was humming along to a terrible pop song on the radio while I chopped vegetables for a stew. I remember the feeling of simple, uncomplicated happiness, a feeling that would soon become a distant memory. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the peaceful afternoon. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to the door, expecting a package or a neighbor. But when I pulled it open, my heart sank. There on the porch stood my mother-in-law, Eleanor, a woman whose presence could suck the warmth out of a room. Behind her were 5 large suitcases looking like a squad of weary soldiers ready for a long occupation. She offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile I had learned to interpret as a warning sign. She announced, without preamble, that she was going through a rough patch. A vague story followed about a falling out with a friend and a need to clear her head. She said she just needed a place to stay for a little while to get her bearings. My wife, Isabella, who had heard the doorbell from the living room, rushed to the entrance. Her face was a mask of concern and immediate, unconditional surrender. I saw the way her shoulders slumped, the way she was already mentally rearranging our lives to accommodate her mother. I tried to catch her eye, to send a silent signal that this was a bad idea, but she was already focused entirely on Eleanor, her voice a soothing balm of reassurances. Before I could even form a coherent objection, the suitcases were being wheeled over our threshold, the wheels clattering loudly on the hardwood floors, a sound that echoed the dread building in my chest. Eleanor surveyed our living room with the critical eye of a home inspector, her gaze lingering on a stack of my books on the coffee table and a smudge on the window. She didn't say anything, but her disapproval was a palpable force in the air. Isabella, ever the peacemaker, quickly began assuring her mother that she was welcome to stay as long as she needed, that we would take care of her. The words "as long as she needed" hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I stood by the door, feeling like an intruder in my own home, as my wife guided her mother toward the guest room, the room we had carefully decorated as a quiet reading space. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this little while was going to be anything but. That night, as I lay in bed next to Isabella, the house felt different. The air was thicker, charged with an unspoken tension. I could hear Eleanor moving around in the room down the hall, the sound of drawers opening and closing, a permanent, unwelcome new rhythm to our lives. The 2-week visit she had mentioned offhandedly had already, in her mind, been upgraded to an indefinite stay, and I was the only one who seemed to see the coming storm. The first week was a masterclass in passive aggression disguised as settling in. Eleanor didn't just unpack, she colonized. Our guest room was transformed into a shrine to her own tastes. Our neutral-colored bedding was replaced with a garish floral comforter she had produced from one of her suitcases. Our minimalist bookshelf was now cluttered with porcelain figurines of cats and angels. The air in the hallway was soon saturated with the cloying scent of her rose perfume, a scent that began to feel like a constant low-grade headache. The 2-week visit she had mentioned offhandedly had already, in her mind, been upgraded to an indefinite stay, and I was the only one who seemed to see the coming storm. The first week was a masterclass in passive aggression disguised as settling in. Eleanor didn't just unpack, she colonized. Our guest room was transformed into a shrine to her own tastes. Our neutral-colored bedding was replaced with a garish floral comforter she had produced from one of her suitcases. Our minimalist bookshelf was now cluttered with porcelain figurines of cats and angels. The air in the hallway was soon saturated with the cloying scent of her rose perfume, a scent that began to feel like a constant low-grade headache. Her presence seeped into every corner of our home. She would rise before us, and by the time I got to the kitchen in the morning, the coffee would be brewed to her liking, a bitter, watery concoction that tasted like disappointment, and the newspaper would be laid out at her customary seat at the dining table, a seat that had quickly become her throne. My cooking, once a source of pride and a way I showed love for my wife, became a public spectacle of criticism. Every meal I prepared was met with a subtle yet piercing analysis. The chicken was a little dry. The pasta sauce was too acidic. The vegetables were slightly overcooked. She never said these things directly to me, of course. Instead, she would make her pronouncements to Isabella, often with a sad, concerned sigh, as if my culinary failings were a symptom of a deeper character flaw. Isabella, in turn, would try to smooth things over, telling me her mother was just a particular person, that she didn't mean anything by it. But she did. Every comment was a tiny pinprick designed to slowly erode my confidence and establish her dominance in the heart of our home, the kitchen. The temporary nature of her stay was never mentioned again. The 2-week marker came and went without a word. Then a month passed, then 2. The suitcases, which had been neatly stacked in a corner of the guest room, were slowly emptied, their contents finding permanent homes in our closets and drawers. It was a slow, creeping invasion, so gradual that it was hard to pinpoint the exact moment she stopped being a guest and started being a resident. The real turning point, however, came with the finances. I started noticing the grocery bills were nearly double what they used to be. Eleanor had specific dietary needs, or so she claimed, which required expensive organic produce and name-brand products. The water and electricity bills climbed as well, with her taking hour-long showers and leaving lights on in every room she entered. I tried to broach the subject with Isabella one evening, suggesting that perhaps her mother could contribute to the household expenses now that she was settled. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Isabella looked at me as if I had suggested we abandon her mother on the side of the road. She explained that it would be deeply disrespectful to ask her own mother for money, that Eleanor was going through a difficult time and was not in a financial position to help. I was left feeling like the villain of the story, a cruel and greedy son-in-law. But as I looked at the stack of bills on the counter, a cold, hard anger began to replace my frustration. This wasn't about respect, it was about being taken advantage of. And I was beginning to realize that my wife was either unwilling or unable to see it. The months bled into a year, and the atmosphere in our home grew increasingly toxic. Eleanor's reign of quiet terror was absolute. She had established a network of control that was both invisible and unbreakable. Her criticisms were no longer confined to my cooking. They had expanded to encompass my career, my choice of clothing, my friends, and even my posture. She would sit in her armchair in the living room like a spider in the center of its web, observing my every move. If I had a friend over, she would find a way to insert herself into the conversation, subtly undermining me with backhanded compliments or stories about my minor mishaps framed as humorous anecdotes. I felt like I was constantly under surveillance, my every action being judged and found wanting. The financial drain continued unabated. I was working longer hours to cover the increased expenses, coming home exhausted to a house that felt less like a sanctuary and more like a courtroom where I was always on trial. Isabella remained a staunch and frustrating defender of her mother. She had a seemingly endless supply of excuses for Eleanor's behavior. She was just lonely. She was still hurting from her old life. She didn't mean to be hurtful. The excuses became a wall between us, a barrier that I couldn't seem to break through. Our conversations became stilted and superficial, skirting around the giant, perfumed elephant in the room. The intimacy we once shared had evaporated, replaced by a careful, walking on eggshells politeness. We were no longer partners. We were co-managers of a difficult and ungrateful tenant. The breaking point for me came during a dinner party we hosted for my boss and his wife. I had spent the entire day cooking a complex, multi-course meal, determined to impress. As I served the main course, a braised lamb shank that I had spent hours perfecting, Eleanor made a loud, theatrical sigh. She looked at my boss's wife and announced that the lamb was a brave choice, as it was so easy to overcook and make tough. She then proceeded to tell a long, drawn-out story about a restaurant she had been to years ago that had served her a terrible piece of lamb, looking at me pointedly the entire time. The table fell silent. My boss's wife tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. I saw the flicker of pity in her eyes. I felt a hot wave of humiliation wash over me. I looked at Isabella, pleading with her silently to say something, to defend me. But she just stared down at her plate, her face flushed with embarrassment. After our guests left, the silence in the house was deafening. I didn't even have the energy to be angry. I just felt hollowed out. I went into the kitchen and began scraping the perfectly cooked, uneaten lamb into the trash can. As I stood there, the sounds of Eleanor and Isabella murmuring in the living room drifted in. They weren't talking about the dinner party or the humiliation I had just endured. Eleanor was complaining about a headache, and Isabella was clucking over her, offering to make her a cup of tea. In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. I wasn't just losing my home, I was losing my wife, and I wasn't sure there was anything left I could do to stop it. The dinner party incident marked a shift in me. The frustration and anger I had been feeling curdled into a cold, hard resolve. I stopped trying to reason with Isabella, stopped trying to make her see the light. It was like talking to a brick wall that was constantly apologizing for the other brick wall that was demolishing our house. Instead, I started observing. I became a quiet, watchful ghost in my own life, cataloging every transgression, every manipulation, every lie. I started to see the patterns more clearly. Eleanor's rough patch was a convenient excuse to avoid any responsibility. Her sensitivity was a weapon to shut down any conversation she didn't like. Her fragility was a shield to protect her from any consequences. And Isabella's loyalty was the key that locked the whole prison up. I began to retreat into myself. I spent more time at the office, not just to work, but to exist in a space where my worth wasn't constantly being questioned. I took up long-distance running on the weekends. Logging miles on the quiet country roads, the rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement a temporary reprieve from the chaos at home. The distance between Isabella and me grew into a chasm. We slept in the same bed, but it felt like we were miles apart. The easy affection, the shared jokes, the simple touch of a hand, it was all gone. We were two strangers sharing a mortgage and a mother-in-law. My life had become a silent, screaming nightmare. Then, one rainy Saturday afternoon, I found it. I was in the study trying to find some old tax documents in a filing cabinet when I came across a pile of mail that had been shoved behind a drawer. It was mail addressed to Eleanor. At first, I almost put it aside, not wanting to invade her privacy, even though she had invaded every aspect of my life. But something made me look. The first envelope was a bank statement. I opened it, my hands trembling slightly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't the statement of someone going through a rough patch. It was the statement of someone with a healthy, robust savings account, one that had a substantial balance and regular deposits. The deposits were from a pension fund, a detail she had never mentioned. I rifled through the other envelopes. There was a notice from a property management company about a rental property she owned in another state, a property that was generating a steady monthly income. There was a statement from an investment portfolio. The rough patch was a lie, a complete and utter fabrication. She wasn't a victim in need of shelter. She was a con artist who had moved in with us for free, all while collecting income from her own assets. She wasn't just a freeloader, she was a parasite, and she had been feeding on us for over a year. I sat there on the floor of the study, surrounded by the evidence of her deception, the rain drumming against the windows. The anger I had been suppressing for months came roaring back, but it was a different kind of anger now. It wasn't a hot, impulsive rage, it was a cold, calculated fury. I had the proof. I had the weapon I needed to finally break through Isabella's defenses. I knew what I had to do. I gathered the documents, my heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm. The game was about to change. I didn't confront Eleanor. That would have been a waste of time. She would have just twisted the truth, played the victim, and cried. My target was Isabella. That evening, after Eleanor had retreated to her room to watch one of her dramatic television shows, I asked Isabella to join me in the study. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse, I simply laid the documents out on the desk, one by one, like a lawyer presenting his case. I pointed to the bank statement with its 5-figure balance. I showed her the rental property income statements. I explained, in a calm and level voice, what these documents meant. I told her that her mother, the woman she believed to be a fragile, destitute victim, was in fact financially stable. She had a pension, a rental income, and a healthy savings account. She had lied to us. She had manipulated us. She had allowed our marriage to crumble, allowed me to be humiliated and disrespected in my own home, all for a lie. As I spoke, I watched Isabella's face. At first, there was confusion, then disbelief. She shook her head, her eyes darting from the papers to my face, as if trying to reconcile the two realities. She murmured that it must be a mistake, that perhaps the documents were old or belonged to someone else. But I was prepared for that. I had done my research. I showed her the dates on the statements, the recent transactions. I pointed out her mother's name and address printed clearly at the top. The evidence was irrefutable. The wall of excuses she had built around her mother for so long began to crack. I saw the dawning realization in her eyes, the slow, painful understanding that she had been played. The color drained from her face. She sank into the chair behind the desk, her hands trembling as she picked up one of the bank statements, her fingers tracing the balance as if it were a foreign language. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by her ragged breathing. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat there, staring at the proof of her mother's betrayal. The foundation of her world, a world built on the unwavering belief in her mother's vulnerability, had just been shattered. For the first time, she was seeing the situation not through the lens of a loyal daughter, but through the eyes of a wife who had been deceived. I watched her, a strange mix of pity and relief washing over me. This was the moment of truth. The battle for our home, for our marriage, was finally about to begin. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we might actually have a chance to win. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a pain so deep it took my breath away. She looked from the documents on the desk to the open door, as if she could see her mother sitting in the living room, a stranger in our home. The choice was hers to make, and for the first time, it seemed she was truly ready to make it. The quiet in the study was broken by a single heart-wrenching sob that escaped Isabella's lips. It was the sound of a dam breaking, the release of a year's worth of suppressed doubt, confusion, and misplaced loyalty. She looked at me, her face a mess of tears and devastation, and for the first time, I saw my wife again, not the defender of her mother, but my partner. She whispered that she didn't know, that she had no idea. She had believed every word, every excuse, every fabricated tale of woe. She had been so focused on protecting her mother that she hadn't realized she was sacrificing her husband, her marriage, and her own happiness in the process. The guilt was written all over her face, a heavy, suffocating cloak. I didn't offer platitudes or tell her it was okay. It wasn't okay. But I saw the genuine remorse in her eyes, and I knew that we had to face this together. Armed with the truth, Isabella found a strength I hadn't seen in her for a very long time. She wiped her tears, her jaw set with a new determination. She stood up, took a deep breath, and walked out of the study and into the living room. I followed, standing in the doorway, a silent witness to the confrontation I had been dreaming of for over a year. Eleanor was in her armchair, as usual, watching a dramatic soap opera. She glanced up at Isabella, annoyed at the interruption. Isabella didn't yell. She didn't scream. Her voice was low and shaking, but it was filled with a steel-like resolve. She laid out the facts, just as I had done for her. She held up the bank statements, the rental notices. She asked her mother why. Why had she lied? Why had she put us through this? The reaction was not what I expected. Eleanor's mask of fragility fell away, replaced by a cold, hard contempt. She didn't deny it. Instead, she became defensive and cruel. She accused Isabella of being ungrateful, of turning on her own flesh and blood for a man. She said that she deserved a comfortable life, that it was Isabella's duty as her daughter to provide it for her. She twisted the narrative, painting herself as the victim of a heartless son-in-law and a disloyal daughter. It was a breathtaking display of manipulation, but this time it didn't work. Isabella saw it for what it was. She told her mother in no uncertain terms that she had to leave. She said that she was welcome to stay until the end of the week, but then she would have to find somewhere else to live. The look on Eleanor's face was one of pure, unadulterated shock. She had never been defied like this. She had never lost control. And she was not about to go quietly. Her final weapon was the most powerful one she had: emotional blackmail. She clutched her chest, her face a mask of feigned distress. She gasped that the stress was too much, that she felt faint, that her heart was racing. She collapsed back into her armchair, a picture of frailty, a masterful performance designed to invoke guilt and panic. She told Isabella that if she was forced out onto the street, the stress would surely kill her, and her death would be on Isabella's hands. It was the ultimate trump card, the move that had always worked in the past. But as I watched Isabella's face, I saw that her mother's power had finally been broken. The tears were gone, replaced by a look of profound sadness and finality. She was no longer a pawn in her mother's game. The standoff in the living room felt like it lasted an eternity. Eleanor, clutching her chest and putting on her Oscar-worthy performance of a woman on the brink of collapse, waited for Isabella to crumble. She waited for the apologies, the frantic promises that she could stay, that everything would be okay. But Isabella stood her ground. She looked at her mother, not with anger, but with a deep, weary pity. She calmly told her that if she was feeling unwell, they could call an ambulance, but that it didn't change the fact that she had to leave. The lack of a panicked reaction from her daughter seemed to genuinely confuse Eleanor. Her performance faltered. She saw that her final, most potent weapon had failed. The game was over. The next 3 days were a strange, silent limbo. Eleanor moved through the house like a ghost, no longer the queen of the castle, but a deposed monarch. The passive-aggressive comments stopped. The critical stares vanished. She simply packed, her movements slow and resentful. Isabella and I didn't engage with her. We were a united front, a quiet, solid wall of resolve. We went about our day, cooking our meals, cleaning our home, and slowly, tentatively reconnecting with each other. There were no grand conversations, no dramatic apologies. There were just small moments. A shared glance across the kitchen, a hand placed briefly on a shoulder. The quiet understanding that we were healing. On the final day, the 5 suitcases were once again lined up in the hallway. They looked smaller now, less threatening. Eleanor, dressed in one of her severe-looking suits, stood by the door. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't look at either of us. She just waited for the taxi we had called for her, her face a stony mask of indignation. When the car pulled up outside, Isabella opened the door. Eleanor walked out without a backward glance and got into the back seat. As the car pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street, Isabella closed the door, the sound of the latch clicking into place, echoing in the sudden, immense silence. We stood there for a long moment, just listening to the quiet. The air in the house already felt lighter, cleaner. The cloying scent of rose perfume was gone. The house was ours again. The road to recovery was not going to be easy. The trust that had been broken would take time to rebuild. The wounds left by Eleanor's year-long occupation would need time to heal. But as I stood there with my wife in our quiet, empty home, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I had been missing for so long. That evening, for the first time in over a year, Isabella and I sat down at the dining table, just the two of us. We cooked a simple meal together, laughing as we bumped into each other in the small kitchen. We talked about our day, about nothing and everything. The conversation was easy, comfortable. The house was filled not with tension, but with the warm, golden light of the setting sun and the quiet promise of a new beginning. We had our home back. And more importantly, we had each other back. The nightmare was over.